I never imagined that my life, once so meticulously arranged, would unravel in such a spectacularly bitter twist. I built my world on trust, hard work, and the quiet belief that loyalty reaps its reward. But that faith was shattered the day my wife, the woman I once thought I knew, revealed her true colors. It started innocuously enough. I still remember the morning when I first sensed something was amiss, a subtle shift in her tone, a flicker of defiance in her eyes as she recounted her meeting with her boss. I had no inkling then that her boss, the very man I respected, would one day play a role in my personal tragedy. Instead, it was he who had the audacity to not only promote her over me, but to secretly conspire with her, feeding her the poison of deceit. The promotion was a twist I'd never expected. In our office, promotions are typically hard-won by blood, sweat, and proven competence. I, too, had labored long hours, sacrificing time with family for professional excellence. Yet when the announcement was made, it wasn't my name on the list but hers. The public justification was vague, her unparalleled vision, and invaluable client relations, yet I could see through the veneer. Deep down, I knew it was less about her capabilities and more about the sordid entanglement behind closed doors. You see, my wife, once a caring partner, had transformed into someone unrecognizable. A bitch, I'd later come to realize, who'd mastered the art of feigning innocence. She was always quick with a sharp retort and an unrepentant smirk, dismissing concerns with a wave of her hand. When confronted, she'd lie with the confidence of a seasoned con artist. I remember the day I caught a glimpse of evidence, a stray text message on her phone hinting at an intimacy that should never have existed between her and the man who had just elevated her status. Yet, like a practiced actress, she masked the truth behind layers of deceit and charm. For weeks, I wrestled with the emerging truth. Every encounter with her and that arrogant boss, whose eyes held secrets far darker than mere ambition, drove home the betrayal. At first, I was numb to the shock and humiliation. But as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, a simmering fire began to burn within me. The husband who once stood in the background of my own life was rising, a confident, calculated man with a singular purpose, to reclaim his dignity and administer justice. The days following that revelation were a blend of painful introspection and clandestine observation. I learned that her meetings with the boss weren't sporadic accidents but a pattern meticulously concealed behind professional pretense. There were whispered rendezvous in parking lots, stolen moments behind closed conference doors, and digital trails that screamed of betrayal. I began piecing together conversations, scanning emails, and discreetly photographing moments that would later serve as evidence of her infidelity and collusion. In the quiet of our shared home, where secrets once lay dormant beneath smiles and everyday banter, I now nurtured my resolve. I plotted with the precision of a chess master, moving each piece with careful deliberation. Each interaction with her became a subtle test of her conscience, a chance to see if the mask of arrogance might slip, revealing even the smallest glimmer of guilt. But she was adept at her performance, always too quick to retort with a venomous laugh or a dismissive scoff when pressed. What stung the most wasn't the act of betrayal itself, but the audacity with which she flaunted her duplicity. Even when I confronted her in hushed tones late at night, desperate for some scrap of remorse, she met my questions with cold indifference. "You always overthink things," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension, as if my hurt were nothing more than a trivial inconvenience. Yet, each word, each cruel dismissal, only fueled the determination in me, a determination that would eventually culminate in a revenge as calculated as it was cold. Now, as I stand at the precipice of retribution, I can't help but reflect on the irony of it all. I had once been the devoted husband, the steady hand in our marriage, while she played the part of a charming seductress with a penchant for lies. But in this twisted game, every betrayal sows the seeds of its own downfall. And believe me, I was done being the pawn in her sordid drama. The stage was set, and with every silent, meticulous step, I began constructing a plan that would expose not only her treachery but also the rot festering within the very heart of our professional world. And so, in the quiet aftermath of that fateful revelation, the journey to reclaim my honor, and to ensure that no one else would be duped by her venomous ways, truly began. With my resolve hardened like tempered steel, I dove headfirst into a labyrinth of meticulous planning and covert operations. The night after our confrontation had passed in a haze of silent calculation. In the dark corners of our home, where the echoes of her dismissive laughter still lingered, I began the slow, deliberate process of gathering every scrap of evidence I could find. I needed to ensure that when the time came, every stone was turned and every betrayal laid bare. Every day, I immersed myself in the shadows of our life together. I combed through her email archives, searched for discrepancies in her work logs, and even reviewed the security footage from our office corridors. I discovered that her so-called visionary ideas were nothing more than recycled concepts stolen from the company's confidential projects, an irony not lost on me. I began to see a pattern. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was orchestrating a full-scale coup, undermining our professional integrity to elevate her own status. The boss, too, had been a willing accomplice, his smarmy assurances a mask for his greed. I documented every instance, the hushed whispers in dimly lit hotel lobbies, the clandestine rendezvous at out-of-town retreats, and the suspicious late-night meetings when I was away on business. I secretly installed a voice recorder in our study and left a hidden camera in our bedroom. The recordings were subtle at first, a soft chuckle, a half-whispered lie, but over time, they transformed into a damning symphony of deceit. Ironically, the more I uncovered, the more I realized how carefully she had engineered every move to deflect suspicion. She perfected the art of denial, using her charm and abiding wit to twist any accusation into a joke. Every confrontation I attempted was met with a condescending smirk and a dismissive, "You're reading too much into nothing." But beneath that veneer of invulnerability, I sensed cracks in her carefully constructed persona. The guilt, however fleeting, was there, a flicker of hesitation when she thought I wasn't looking, a momentary lapse in her arrogant mask. I recalled one particular afternoon, a turning point in my investigation. I had been in the office, working quietly at my desk, when I overheard her talking to someone on the phone in a hushed, urgent tone. I couldn't make out every word, but phrases like hidden account and backup plan sent chills down my spine. That conversation revealed more than I had anticipated. She wasn't just planning her next deceit. She was scheming to cover her tracks, ensuring that if the truth ever came to light, no one would be able to trace it back to her. As I pieced together this treacherous puzzle, I found myself growing not only more resolute but almost strangely empowered. The shock and sorrow that had once consumed me were slowly transmuting into a cold, calculated determination. Every detail, every whispered secret, was now a weapon in my arsenal. I wasn't simply seeking justice. I was preparing to exact revenge with surgical precision. I decided it was time to lure her into a trap of her own making. With the evidence mounting, I crafted an intricate web of invitations and feigned ignorance. I arranged a high-stakes corporate gala, an event where her presence was not only expected but celebrated. I made sure that every influential figure in our company, including those who had once championed her, would be in attendance. The stage was set for her grand finale, a moment when her carefully hidden sins would be exposed to everyone. In the days leading up to the gala, I reached out to a few trusted colleagues who had also suspected her underhanded tactics. They, too, had been betrayed by her charm and devious schemes. We formed an unspoken alliance, each sharing pieces of evidence that painted a damning portrait of a woman who had manipulated not just her husband, but the very fabric of our professional community. The evening of the gala arrived with an electric tension in the air. Dressed in a sharp suit that mirrored my newfound confidence, I entered the grand hall. Every step I took was measured, my eyes scanning for familiar faces, for allies, and for the inevitable moment when her mask would finally slip. As the evening unfolded, her laughter rang out, a brittle sound, masking the anxiety that bubbled beneath the surface. I watched her interact, her smiles too rehearsed, her compliments too hollow. And as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I knew that the moment of reckoning was at hand. Backstage, away from prying eyes, I prepared for the final act of my plan. I sent a discreet message to our allies. Tonight, everything would change. I felt a perverse thrill as I thought about the look on her face when her duplicity was laid bare for all to see. Every whispered conversation, every clandestine meeting, every sordid secret was now a card in my hand, ready to be played at precisely the right moment. And so, as I watched the mingling crowd with a calm that belied the storm raging inside, I smiled. I was no longer the wounded husband, drowning in betrayal. I was the master of my own destiny, armed with the truth and a plan that would make her pay dearly. The night was young, and as the final pieces of my plan fell into place, I knew that my revenge would be as cold-blooded as it was inevitable. The gala was unfolding with an intensity that no one in that grand hall could have anticipated. Every glittering chandelier, every carefully arranged table, and every tailored suit concealed a storm that was brewing beneath the veneer of corporate sophistication. I could feel the pulse of anticipation in the air, a silent countdown to the moment when her elaborate facade would finally crumble. I moved through the crowd with deliberate grace, my eyes fixed on her. She was at the center of attention, as always, laughing, conversing, and exuding an air of untouchable superiority. But beneath that glittering exterior, I sensed the subtle tremors of panic. She was a master manipulator, yet even the best can slip up when cornered. I made my way to a secluded corner near the stage, where I had already set the final pieces of my plan into motion. My trusted allies, those who had once suffered in silence at her hands, were already in position. Each had a role to play in tonight's reckoning. I recalled the countless moments of betrayal, the snide remarks, the dismissive gestures, the cold laughter that had punctuated my every attempt at confronting her about the infidelities. Tonight, those moments would coalesce into a symphony of retribution. As the event's host began to speak about integrity and loyalty, I knew this was my cue. The lights dimmed slightly, and a spotlight swept across the room, accentuating the tension in every eye. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months, the hours of surveillance, the stolen conversations, and the painstaking collection of evidence fuel my resolve. Before I could make my move, an unexpected twist unraveled before me. Out of the blue, an email notification flashed on my tablet. It was a message from someone claiming to have information that would shatter the entire narrative I'd painstakingly built. Intrigued and cautious, I read the email. It contained a single line. "There's more to this story than betrayal. Meet me in the balcony at midnight." The sender was anonymous, but the message hinted at another layer to her deceit, a secret so dangerous that even I hadn't foreseen its implications. This revelation made my blood run cold. Was it possible that she had been orchestrating a far more sinister game behind our backs? Had her ambition extended beyond a mere extramarital affair, implicating other powerful figures, or even involving elements that endangered our entire professional network? I felt a momentary hesitation, not of doubt in my plan, but of curiosity mixed with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. It was about exposing a network of corruption that had seeped into the very foundation of our organization. Determined to seize control of this unexpected twist, I signaled discreetly to one of my most trusted colleagues, a silent acknowledgement to keep a watchful eye on the unfolding events. I then resolved to meet this mysterious informant, all while ensuring that my plan at the gala continued unabated. If she thought that tonight was solely about her illicit liaison with my boss, she had underestimated the labyrinth of deceit in which she was entangled. The moment of reckoning came faster than I anticipated. As the host's speech wound down, the room grew expectant. I stepped onto the stage, my voice calm and unwavering as I began to recount a tale of integrity, deception, and betrayal in our organization. I wove a narrative that started with misplaced trust and culminated in the unraveling of a network of falsehoods. My carefully chosen words were a double-edged sword. They both admonished the very idea of blind loyalty and subtly alluded to the personal betrayal I had suffered. I could see her reaction, a fleeting flash of terror masked by an insincere smile, as I casually mentioned the unanticipated twist that some had come forward with undeniable evidence of malfeasance. It was a verbal gauntlet thrown before her, one that she couldn't dodge with her usual practiced charm. The room was silent, every ear straining to catch the next carefully crafted sentence. As I stepped back, the spotlight shifting to her, I saw the panic become overt. Her eyes darted about, searching for a means of escape or an ally to help her navigate the unfolding scandal. It was then that my anonymous informant appeared, a figure in a dark suit, stepping forward onto the stage with an envelope in hand. In a measured, almost theatrical tone, he declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to reveal the truth." The envelope was passed to the host, and with a flourish, its contents were projected onto the large screen behind us. There, in bold, indisputable detail, were transcripts of incriminating conversations, financial records implicating her in covert dealings, and even more damningly, proof that her relationship with my boss was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. The evidence pointed to a deliberate, systematic attempt to manipulate corporate dynamics for personal gain, a betrayal not only of our trust but of the very principles upon which our organization was built. I watched as she turned pale, her veneer of arrogance evaporating under the scrutiny of every gaze in the room. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered, and she resorted to biting, halting words, pleading, almost, for an explanation. The audience, once enchanted by her charm, now looked upon her with a mix of disbelief and contempt. Every whispered murmur, every exchanged glance, confirmed that the tide had turned irreversibly. In that charged moment, I realized that my path of vengeance was now irrevocably intertwined with this larger, more treacherous battle against corruption. My personal vendetta had become a catalyst for exposing a far-reaching network of deceit, a coup that involved not just an unfaithful wife and a conniving boss, but an entire underbelly of corporate treachery. The stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined, and the game had changed. As the lights brightened and the murmurs of shock began to crescendo, I knew that this was merely the beginning. I had taken my first bold step into a dangerous arena, one where every revelation carried the weight of lives and careers. And though the night had become a battleground of truths and lies, my resolve remained unshaken. I was ready to continue down this dark path, determined to unmask every hidden sin and bring justice to a world that had long tolerated deceit. The fallout from that explosive night at the gala rippled through our corporate corridors like wildfire. As the embers of scandal smoldered, I retreated into the shadows of my own plans. My heart, once heavy with the bitterness of betrayal, now beat with the cold precision of calculated retribution. I had unmasked her treachery, but I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. In the hours that followed, the atmosphere in the office became almost surreal. Colleagues whispered in hushed tones about the shocking revelations, and a palpable tension clung to every conversation. Yet, amidst this chaos, I remained unflinching. I knew that what had happened at the gala was only the opening act of a far grimmer performance, one in which I would cast the final, decisive blow. I began to dig even deeper. The anonymous tip at the gala had been just the tip of an iceberg. Over the following days, I received a series of cryptic messages, each one peeling away another layer of deceit. The informant, still nameless and shrouded in mystery, hinted at a scandal so vast that it threatened to topple not only my wife's empire of lies, but also implicate her high-powered lover, my former boss. Every new piece of evidence promised to expose further corruption, and with each discovery, my resolve grew. I wasn't just cleaning house. I was orchestrating a reckoning that would leave no stone unturned. Meanwhile, my wife, a master of manipulation and a bitch in every sense, tried desperately to salvage what remained of her crumbling reputation. Her attempts were as laughable as they were pathetic. Staged interviews with the press, carefully rehearsed apologies that dripped with insincerity, and frantic denials of any wrongdoing. Yet, every lie she spun only tightened the noose around her neck. I watched with grim satisfaction as she floundered, her usual bravado giving way to an almost visible panic. One cold, rain-soaked evening, as I was returning from a discreet meeting with one of my most trusted allies, I caught sight of her. She stood under the flickering neon glow of an office building, her figure hunched in a futile attempt to shield herself from the downpour. For a brief moment, I saw vulnerability in her eyes, an echo of the woman she once pretended to be. But that fleeting glimpse vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the ruthless mask she wore so well. I felt a chill, not from the rain, but from the certainty that her time was nearly up. Yet, as the days slipped by, the drama took another unexpected twist. The mysterious informant reached out directly. We arranged a secret meeting at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place as desolate and unforgiving as the truth I was about to uncover. I arrived early, every instinct on high alert, knowing that in the world I had plunged into, trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. In the dim light of a single, swinging bulb, the informant finally emerged. Cloaked in a dark overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat that concealed half of his face, he exuded an air of grim purpose. His voice was low and measured as he spoke. "You've done well, but there's one more secret. Your wife's betrayal, her collusion with your boss, is merely a symptom of a much deeper rot. There's a covert alliance that has been siphoning resources from our company for years, and she's been its poster child. My eyes narrowed as I absorbed his words. The implications were staggering. Not only had she betrayed our marriage and our professional ethics, but she had also become an unwitting, or perhaps complicit, agent in a massive fraud. I demanded details, and he handed me a dossier thicker than I'd ever seen, brimming with documents, bank statements, and coded correspondence. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of her credibility and a testament to her role as the linchpin in a vast criminal network. That night, as I pored over the evidence in my study, the pieces finally aligned in a macabre mosaic of betrayal. The betrayal wasn't confined to the sordid affair or the audacious promotion. It was systemic, infecting the very foundations of our corporate structure. I realized that dismantling her operation meant not just avenging our personal transgressions, but also purging an entire culture of corruption. The final phase of my plan began to crystallize in my mind. I would invite her to one last private meeting, a final confrontation where I could force her to face the totality of her crimes. I set the stage meticulously, choosing an abandoned boardroom in our headquarters that was rarely visited. There, with the cold efficiency of a man who had nothing left to lose, I arranged to meet her under the guise of discussing a last chance to clear her name. The day of the meeting arrived with an eerie calm. I could almost feel the weight of fate pressing upon me. When she arrived, she was uncharacteristically subdued, her usual snide retorts replaced by hesitant, almost desperate eyes. I wasted no time. I laid out the dossier, each document a silent indictment of her misdeeds, her duplicity, and her systematic betrayal. I watched as her facade of arrogance shattered, replaced by a dawning realization of the trap she'd walked into. As her defenses crumbled, I pressed further, my voice devoid of emotion. You built your empire on lies, on the stolen trust of those around you. Tonight, you stand before the ruins of your deceit. Her eyes darted around in vain, searching for any escape, any glimmer of hope. But in that moment, the air grew heavy with the inevitability of justice, a justice that would be delivered in a manner as cold and unyielding as the winter wind. I leaned in, my tone a whisper of finality. You lied, you cheated, and you manipulated. Now, you will pay the price. And with that, the final act of my revenge was set into motion, a meticulously orchestrated blow that would leave no doubt that betrayal, no matter how artfully disguised, would always meet its reckoning. I invited her to the abandoned boardroom under the guise of a final chance to redeem herself, a ruse that would soon reveal her fate. The sterile, fluorescent-lit room felt like the setting of a macabre theater, each shadow dancing with memories of every betrayal. As I waited, a storm of suppressed anger churned within me, and I rehearsed the final lines of a performance that had become all too real. When she arrived, her posture was brittle and defensive, her eyes darting around as if expecting rescuers at any moment. The audacity with which she had manipulated every situation earlier was now reduced to a trembling mask. I don't understand why we're here, she said, her voice a mix of indignation and barely concealed panic. I've done nothing wrong. I didn't offer her the comfort of explanation. Instead, I produced the dossier, a thick stack of documents, photos, and recordings that traced every step of her calculated descent into treachery. Everything you've built, I said coolly, every lie, every stolen moment, is laid bare before you. I let my words hang in the air, each syllable measured to strip away her last vestiges of control. Her eyes widened as she scanned the evidence, and for a moment, the notorious bitch she'd always been, the one who scoffed at truth and reveled in deceit, flickered with desperation. You don't know what you're talking about, she snapped, attempting to deflect with a rehearsed sneer. This is all a misunderstanding, a setup. A bitter laugh escaped me. A setup? I repeated, my tone icily amused. The real setup, my dear, was you. Every lie, every covert meeting, every stolen glance with that so-called mentor, you wove them into the tapestry of your ambition. And now, the truth is inescapable. I watched her flinch as the evidence seemed to sap the very color from her face. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. Her facade, already shattered by the weight of proof, began to crack further when she realized she wasn't the only one ensnared by her own machinations. With a trembling sigh, she mumbled, I never intended for it to go this far. It was all just business. Her words, feeble and disjointed, betrayed the truth she'd spent months hiding. Her admission was the final drop in the reservoir of my collected fury. Business? I echoed, my voice a low, dangerous murmur. You traded our trust, our life together, for a few fleeting moments of power. And now, you've left nothing but ruin in your wake. I could see the panic in her eyes intensify, a desperate spark that spoke of the realization that every lie had led her to this very moment, a moment from which there was no escape. In that instant, the cold calculation that had defined my every move coalesced into one final, irreversible act. I stepped closer, my gaze unyielding, as I retrieved a small, silenced pistol from the hidden compartment in the conference table, a weapon I had acquired earlier in my quest for justice. The irony wasn't lost on me. A man once broken by betrayal, now armed with the means to deliver a punishment as precise as it was final. Don't try to run, I warned, my voice devoid of remorse. This isn't just about me or even about your lies. It's about every life you've tainted with your deceit. For a suspended heartbeat, her lips parted as if to plead, but the dam of her arrogance crumbled entirely. In that moment of abject vulnerability, she realized the full weight of her transgressions. She attempted one last desperate plea, her tone shifting into a mix of arrogance and fear. You're insane if you think killing me will fix anything. I have connections. I can still, her voice cut off as I silenced her words with one calculated squeeze of the trigger. The shot was muffled, but its finality resonated through the room like a death knell for everything she had represented. I lowered the gun slowly, my eyes never leaving her crumpled form as the life drained from her. The silence that followed was deafening, a cruel punctuation to a sentence of betrayal. In that cold, unyielding moment, I realized that every calculated step, every piece of damning evidence, had led inexorably to this act. I was no longer the wounded husband. I was the arbiter of justice, delivering a verdict that could never be undone. Just then, an unexpected rustle of movement drew my attention, a subtle shift at the far end of the room. One of my most trusted allies, the very person who had helped gather the evidence, emerged from the shadows. He carried with him one final envelope, one that I had not seen before. There's something else, he said quietly, his voice laden with urgency. Something that implicates more than just her. It appears this network of corruption runs deeper than you ever imagined. I retrieved the envelope and flipped it open. Inside were files that connected her with higher-ups in the company, a web of deceit that reached into the very core of our corporate empire. The realization struck me, by ending her reign of lies, I had only scratched the surface of a far more insidious conspiracy. My revenge, as cold and definitive as it had been, was merely the opening salvo in a battle for a justice that ran deeper than personal betrayal. As I stepped out of the boardroom into the dark, rain-soaked night, I knew that my journey was far from over. The path ahead promised further revelations, deeper deceptions, and a fight against a corrupt system that had poisoned our lives for far too long. But for now, as I watched the storm mirror the turmoil within me, I felt a grim satisfaction. I had reclaimed my dignity and set in motion a chain of events that would force every crooked soul to answer for their sins. The rain was still coming down in relentless sheets as I drove away from the scene, the weight of what had transpired settling into the recesses of my mind. The warehouse, the boardroom, it all blurred into a series of cold, calculated memories that I couldn't afford to dwell upon. In my gloved hand, the envelope from my ally burned like an unspoken promise. This was merely the tip of a dark iceberg. As I navigated the deserted backroads, I felt the dual pull of vindication and the burden of a far greater mission. Returning to the sanctuary of my study, I spread out the damning files on my mahogany desk. The documents were meticulous and damning, revealing layers of corruption that extended far beyond the personal betrayal I had just enacted. It wasn't just my wife and her conniving boss. They were mere cogs in a vast, rot-infested machine that siphoned resources, manipulated contracts, and ruined lives in the name of profit. Each paper, each bank statement, and every coded email was a link in this chain of systemic deceit. I knew that to dismantle this network, I needed allies who shared my thirst for justice. I reached out to a trusted friend from the company, a seasoned auditor with a reputation for unearthing financial discrepancies. In the dim light of an underground bar frequented by those disillusioned with corporate hypocrisy, we met face to face. Over bitter coffee and amidst hushed whispers, I laid bare the truth I had uncovered. His eyes widened with a mix of shock and determination as he scanned the evidence. "This goes deeper than we thought," he murmured, his voice gravelly with restrained anger. "We're not just cleaning up a single case of infidelity. This is an entire empire built on lies. Buoyed by this newfound partnership, I devised a strategy that would expose the conspiracy from within. The plan was to infiltrate the inner sanctum of those responsible. A meeting of high-ranking officials and corporate bigwigs was scheduled in a secluded manner on the outskirts of town. With every detail of my scheme meticulously planned, I prepared for what would be the most dangerous act of my crusade. In the days leading up to the gathering, I immersed myself in reconnaissance. I hacked into the company's internal network with a discreet tool I'd acquired from an old friend in cybersecurity. Every chat log, every encrypted file, confirmed that the conspiracy was not only sprawling but deeply entrenched in every echelon of power. My resolve hardened further. I wasn't just avenging a betrayal. I was waging a war against corruption itself. On the night of the meeting, I dressed in an unassuming suit and blended into the crowd of influential figures, each one a potential accomplice in the grand conspiracy. The manner was a lavish display of opulence, a stark contrast to the grim reality I was about to unearth. I moved through the corridors with the precision of a man who had nothing left to lose, my every step echoing with the promise of retribution. In one dimly lit study off the main hall, I encountered a familiar face, one of the very architects of the financial deceptions. He was a middle-aged man with calculating eyes that missed nothing. When our eyes met, a silent battle of wills ensued. I had the evidence in my possession, but he had the power to silence me with a few well-placed connections. It was then that the anonymous informant's voice rang in my memory, reminding me that truth was an unstoppable force when wielded with conviction. I engaged him in conversation, casually steering the dialogue toward the topic of financial irregularities. Every word he uttered, every pause, was a piece of the puzzle I was assembling. As the discussion deepened, I subtly signaled to my undercover contact, a discreet earpiece concealed beneath my collar, requesting a live feed of the ongoing conversations in the room. The data poured in, names, transactions, and even coded references to offshore accounts. It was all there, a roadmap to dismantling the criminal network. Just as the tension reached its peak, the lights in the manor flickered and dimmed. A hush fell over the room as a projected presentation illuminated the wall, detailing the network's nefarious activities in brutal clarity. The conspirators scrambled, their confident facades giving way to furtive glances and whispered warnings. In that charged moment, the house of cards began to tremble, and I realized that my meticulously laid plans were coming to fruition. I stepped forward, my voice resonating with unyielding authority as I addressed the assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my tone calm yet laden with the weight of undeniable truth. "Tonight, the veil is lifted. What you see here are the secrets that have corrupted our institution for far too long." The room erupted into chaos, shouts, accusations, and desperate attempts at damage control. The veneer of power shattered before the eyes of those who had once considered themselves untouchable. In the ensuing mayhem, I managed to secure critical testimonies from several disgruntled insiders, each one reinforcing the extent of the fraud. I knew that once this evidence was made public, there would be no escaping the inevitable downfall of the entire network. As security scrambled to regain control, I slipped away into the night, the adrenaline of righteous vengeance fueling my every step. With each passing moment, the corruption that had ruled our lives for so long began to unravel, leaving in its wake the bitter taste of justice served cold. But deep in my heart, I understood that the war was far from over. This was merely the beginning of a crusade, a mission to purge the malignant rot that had long festered within our corporate world. I merged into the shadows, the weight of my actions mingling with the hope that, eventually, the truth would set us all free. The storm outside raged on, a fitting mirror to the turmoil within, as I prepared for the next phase in my relentless pursuit of justice. The chaos at the manor had sparked a chain reaction that rippled far beyond the gilded walls of corruption. In the aftermath of that explosive confrontation, I found myself thrust into a dangerous new phase, a covert war against a powerful syndicate whose tendrils reached into every facet of our industry. The adrenaline of that night still pulsed in my veins as I worked feverishly to consolidate the evidence and anticipate the inevitable backlash. In the dim light of my study, I pored over the fresh testimonies and encrypted files I had secured during the Manor incident. Every document was a grim reminder that the rot ran deeper than I had ever suspected. The corporate giants, once untouchable in their ivory towers, were now vulnerable, their secrets laid bare for the world to see. I knew that the next move had to be as precise and ruthless as the actions that had led me here. Days melted into nights as I strategized with my trusted allies. Our meetings were clandestine, held in abandoned warehouses and off-the-grid cafes where whispers were safer than shouts. We compiled a digital dossier, a veritable arsenal of damning evidence that not only implicated the conspirators but also exposed their methods of siphoning funds and rigging contracts. Each file, each recorded conversation, was a piece of the puzzle that would eventually bring the entire network crashing down. But the more I uncovered, the more dangerous my position became. I began receiving ominous warnings, anonymous messages, shadowy figures tailing my movements, and unsettling phone calls in the dead of night. It became clear that the syndicate was desperate to silence anyone who threatened to expose them. Yet, with every threat, my determination only hardened. I had tasted the bitterness of betrayal and the sweet satisfaction of retribution. I would not be cowed. One cold, moonless evening, while poring over a series of particularly damning financial records, I noticed a discrepancy. A hidden transaction routed through an offshore account that didn't match any known pattern. The trail led to a figure known only by the codename Viper, a shadow within the conspiracy rumored to be the mastermind behind the financial fraud. It was said that Viper had the power to wipe out anyone who crossed his path. The very thought sent a shiver down my spine. Yet it also ignited a spark of daring resolve. I realized that if I could expose Viper, the rest of the corrupt empire would crumble like a house of cards. I set out to track this elusive figure, using every resource at my disposal. Hacking into secure databases, collaborating with disgruntled former employees, and even risking contact with underground informants became my new modus operandi. Each lead, though perilous, edged me closer to the truth. I learned that Viper was not just an abstract name. He was a man who had risen through the ranks by exploiting loopholes in our financial systems, leaving a trail of ruined careers and shattered lives in his wake. As I delved deeper, I discovered that Viper's operations were interwoven with more personal betrayals than I had ever imagined. A former colleague, once a close friend, had been coerced into laundering money for him. Their relationship had soured long ago, but the scars of that betrayal now provided a crucial link in unraveling the syndicate's web. I arranged a secret meeting with this man in a derelict dockside warehouse, a fitting setting for a confrontation with the ghosts of our shared past. Under the harsh glare of a single overhead bulb, he revealed what he knew. Viper isn't just a financier. He's the puppet master who orchestrated the downfall of countless innocents, he whispered, his voice trembling with regret. He hides behind layers of legitimate business, but every empire built on lies has a weak foundation. His confession was raw and unguarded, a rare moment of truth that further emboldened my resolve to bring the entire network to justice. With the new intel in hand, I meticulously mapped out Viper's financial maneuvers. Every transaction, every coded memo, began to paint a vivid picture of his elaborate scheme. But I also knew that exposing him would not come without a personal cost. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that my own life was now inextricably linked to this dangerous game. The enemy was not just a faceless network of corruption. It was a living, breathing force with the capacity for ruthless retribution. Yet, I pressed on. I began leaking selected pieces of evidence to trusted media contacts, ensuring that when the final blow was delivered, the world would witness the collapse of a corrupt empire. In the meantime, I prepared for what I anticipated would be Viper's retaliatory strike, a final, cataclysmic showdown that would test every ounce of my resolve and cunning. Every shadow seemed to whisper warnings, every quiet street corner hinted at impending danger. But I was no longer the man who once wallowed in betrayal and despair. I was transformed, a relentless seeker of truth and justice, prepared to face the ultimate nemesis. And as the pieces of the puzzle began to converge, I could almost sense that the final confrontation with Viper was near. The storm was gathering, and soon, the The truth would be unleashed with a fury that no one, least of all Viper, could withstand. The city was cloaked in the deep hues of midnight when I received the final tip-off from one of my most reliable informants. A cryptic message that simply read, "Viper is coming for you." Midnight. The pier. It was the kind of warning that sent a shudder down your spine. The kind that made you double-check every shadow and every unlit alley. I knew the confrontation was inevitable, and I had prepared every inch of my plan for this moment. At the deserted pier, the salty breeze mingled with a tense anticipation. Fog rolled in from the sea, shrouding the area in a ghostly veil that made every sound seem amplified. The creak of weathered wood, the distant splash of waves, even the soft murmur of my own breath. I positioned myself near a rusted container, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. I wasn't alone tonight. My allies had spread out discreetly, ensuring that I had backup if things spiraled out of control. But deep down, I knew that the ultimate confrontation would be between me and the elusive Viper. Minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up silently, its headlights cutting through the fog like twin daggers. Out stepped a man whose very presence radiated cold authority. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that seemed both out of place and perfectly suited for the role he played in this dark underworld. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met mine with a challenge that spoke volumes. In that instant, I recognized him as the man who had been orchestrating the financial mayhem behind the scenes, the infamous Viper. Without preamble, Viper spoke in a calm, almost disarming tone. "I must commend you on your tenacity," he said, his voice measured and icy. "Few would dare meddle in affairs far beyond their understanding." His words dripped with condescension, yet they betrayed a hint of admiration for the very risk he was taking. I replied steadily, "This isn't about meddling. It's about exposing a cancer that's been eating away at our organization. Your empire of lies ends tonight." A bitter smile curled on his lips. "Exposing the truth is a dangerous game. You think you've won, but every action has consequences." As he spoke, he produced a small device and pressed a button. Instantly, a hidden speaker on the pier crackled to life, broadcasting live audio from a secret surveillance feed. The voices of my closest allies echoed in the background. Evidence of our covert operation had been relayed to every major news outlet, setting the stage for a public reckoning that would leave the corrupt exposed for the world to see. Viper's eyes narrowed as he realized that his carefully constructed fortress of secrecy was crumbling. But before he could counter, a sudden commotion erupted behind him. Out of the fog emerged a group of men in dark uniforms, mercenaries whose allegiance, I hoped, lay with the forces of justice rather than with corruption. In the ensuing chaos, shots rang out, echoing off the water and sending sparks into the night air. I ducked behind a stack of shipping containers as bullets whizzed by. The sound of the firefight was like a perverse symphony, marking the climax of a battle that had been building for months. In the midst of the chaos, Viper made a dash for an unguarded corner of the pier. I pursued him with unwavering determination. Every step I took was driven by the memories of every betrayal, every lie that had cost me so dearly. As I closed the distance, Viper spun around, his face a mask of desperation. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he hissed, his voice trembling with both anger and fear. "This goes far beyond you and me. There are forces at play that you can't possibly comprehend." I didn't allow myself a moment of hesitation. "Then show me," I retorted, my voice echoing off the cold metal of the containers. The confrontation had reached its boiling point, a final, desperate duel between two men who had been consumed by vengeance and the thirst for justice. In the next few heartbeats, every second stretched into an eternity. With the piercing flash of my hidden torch, I caught a glimpse of Viper's face contorting as he fumbled for a weapon. Before he could act, I lunged forward, pinning him against the cold, damp concrete of the pier. His eyes widened in shock as I whispered, "Your reign of terror ends now." With deliberate, measured movements, I restrained him, securing him with a length of chain I'd brought along. The sound of sirens in the distance confirmed that the net was closing in. The media, law enforcement, and every wronged soul were about to witness the downfall of a monster. In that charged moment, as Viper struggled against his bonds, he spat out, "You think you've won? This is only the beginning." His voice was laced with venom, but I could see the resignation in his eyes. "Maybe," I replied, "but tonight, justice has a victor." The flash of cameras and the murmur of arriving officers marked the culmination of months of sacrifice, risk, and unyielding resolve. Every secret, every piece of damning evidence, was now set to topple an empire of corruption that had long reigned unchecked. As I watched Viper being led away in handcuffs, I couldn't shake the lingering feeling that the web of deceit was even more vast than I had uncovered. His parting words echoed in my mind as I stepped away from the chaos, a warning that the system's rot ran deeper than one man's downfall. But for now, the immediate threat had been neutralized, and the truth, in all its cold, unvarnished brutality, was finally coming to light.